We'll just start off as we just watched a clip from Hairspray. That's the film, as I said, you've kind of called your Trojan horse.
Yeah, because I always thought, I didn't try to make a film that was more commercial. I thought, oh, this is my next movie. It stars Divine. We'll get an R rating usually. And when we got the PG rating, even the distributor flipped out. They said, put in the word shit, something, because it'll kill your career. But actually I thought, wait a minute, maybe this is the way we can surprise everybody, that I actually accidentally made a family movie. And I call it my Trojan horse because now it was a big hit here. The musical became a giant hit in America. It's in every high school in America. They're performing this. And I used to make the joke that the fat girl and the drag queen can finally get the part. But because of political correctness now, they can't cast by race or weight in America in the schools. So I have seen Hairspray performed with a skinny black girl as Tracy, which is postmodern in a way. And so each time I wanted, and in Korea, we found out they were doing it in South Korea in blackface. We said, you really can't do that, right? And they said, why? We don't have any black people here. And I said, well, there's other minorities. And then in Texas, this is true, they had an all-white version where all white people played the black parts. And when we freaked out, they said, we couldn't find any. We had one, but she quit. That didn't last very long either, that one.
Around sort of similar time actually last year, we had Peter Greenaway on the stage here. Yeah. And the reason I mention that is because he's somebody who is often often kind of really enjoys the kind of label of being an outsider. And he just received a BAFTA fellowship, and I think was both kind of happy and kind of thrilled he was being recognised, but also felt slightly kind of uncertain and a bit kind of bemused, and maybe even, I think, felt that was going to affect how he was seen somehow. And in the same way, we're sort of celebrating your career here at the British Film Institute, and I wonder...
Oh, that doesn't bother me. Are you kidding? Finally I'm an insider. That's the most perverse thing that could ever happen. And to give me great respectability, which, I have no irony about being very proud of this evening. And my mother was a total Anglophile. I really wish she was here tonight to see this, because she would have been very, very as proud as I am.
That's great. Well, as part of this sort of celebration, you've allowed us to show those kind of early shorts that you made when you were a teenager, right at the very, very start. And you've kind of teased audiences with the fact that they exist in your art books and installations, and you've talked about them as well, but we've not actually been able to see them until now.
Well, maybe there's a good reason. Andy Warhol said my early films are better to talk about than to see, and this might be true too. I think if you know my work, they're home movies. I mean, they were filmed, Dreamland Studios was my bedroom at my parents' house. Hag in a black leather jacket. My grandmother gave me a Brownie movie camera, and I didn't know there was editing. I thought what came out of the camera was the movie, and in this case, it was. It was very Dogma 95, and I didn't even realize it, right? Roman Candles was just home movies of my friends, and I had just seen Chelsea Girls, so I was incredibly influenced by that. But, Chelsea Girls was about Bohemia and Greenwich Village. This were like bad suburban kids in Lutherville, Maryland. It didn't have the exact thing. I think when the first thing that I ever did in any of the movies that really was better, like my later work that I'm proud of, was in Eat Your Makeup, where I have the complete Kennedy assassination with Divine playing Jackie, crawling over the trunk of the car in the bloody pillbox. But this was only about 2 years after it really happened. And I filmed it at my parents' house on the street, and they said, what are you filming today? And we said, oh, nothing. And then they look out and see the entire Kennedy assassination being filmed. And then the neighbors really were mad. And Divine's mother didn't know he was Divine, didn't know anything about any of it, right? And she found the bloody Jackie Kennedy outfit rolled up in her trunk of her car and said, what is this? And Divine was just on marijuana. He didn't know what to say. He just said, I am Jackie Kennedy. And she dropped it, right? And it was only shown once in a church. We always used to get churches, which is hard to imagine today, but not Catholic churches. But churches then had anti-war rallies. They let the Black Panthers go. They were left-wing, really. So they let us show these films. They hadn't seen them, but they showed them. And then I entered it in the first film festival that was in Maryland, and they stopped it halfway and called it pernicious, a word I didn't know what I meant, but that was maybe the best review I ever got. And then called the IRS, so I could not pass the hat around to take contributions at the church. They were that furious about it. And I understand why. I guess it wasn't so politically correct, you know.
I mean, you kind of famously said that the films were made on pot for potheads.
Well, I thought it up on pot, and the audience was on pot, but I wasn't on pot when I actually made it.
Okay.
Because we never could have. I don't know how I made those movies. I look back on it and I didn't know anything. We would get the cameras from like Teamster types that were. This was before video or anything. So all those. The news was filmed by 16 millimeter with a magnetic stripe on it that they recorded the sound right on the film, and that's the camera we used. Paul Morrissey used the same kind of camera, an Auricon, and basically I would just pay these Teamsters to illegally get the equipment from the stations and rent it to me. They'd keep the money, so it was like, you know, kidnapped equipment in a way. And they taught me how to do it, and I look back on it and I thought, what did they think? These were hardly underground types. These were like, you know, blue-collar, like Teamster types that were sitting there, even on Pink Flamingos, and they would go all the way up in that woods and that freezing weather and see, like, Edie sitting in a playpen, and, you know, and I remember once one of them brought one of their wives to see, and she looked like she just saw the My Lai massacre when she got up there, and she grabbed him, let's get out of here, and he never came back. When, you know, and it was just Edith going, hi, sitting there in the playpen, and the woman was so horrified by that sight. And Edie was just being friendly. I don't know.
I mean, what really comes across from those really, really early shorts, though, is that despite the fact, as I said, you were just a teenager, you were using your mum and dad's house as a location, there was no budget really to speak of. Actually, it seems to have been taken incredibly seriously. Did you instill that kind of?
Yeah, I was serious about doing it, and we had lots of rehearsal. And with that mag film, there was no A and B cutting. You didn't shoot coverage. You just shot the entire scene like a TV sitcom, basically. So people had to memorize, you know, 5 pages of script. And if they made one mistake, I'd start from the beginning and flip out. And I was telling you backstage, and I'm terrible. I've been in other people's movies when I have to memorize lines. I'm really bad at it. So, and I realized how intolerable I was at this.
So were you just there with the cassette, just playing the music at the same time? Or
no, in some of them, no, in like the Multiple Maniacs and stuff, the music was, we'd film the film, I get it, I edit it, but then the music, I would just record it right from the record player in the room, right on the mag strip, in the recorder. The speaker was on there and then put it on. There was no mixing. There was no mix of Multiple Maniacs. It was just filmed, you know, put right on the projector.
And what definitely comes across for those people who do come over the weekend and see the early films, you can definitely see the progression, can't you? If you actually look at the films from that point, each film, it's almost like you learn a new skill.
Well, I learned. I didn't go to film school. You know, as Cecile B. Demented said, that, you know, a technique is nothing more than failed style.
I think you've said before that, like, so the character of Cecile B. Demented could have been you if you didn't have supportive parents.
Well, but Cecile B. Demented had no sense of humor. Hopefully, I did. Like, I was a fascist, but he was a. No, I wasn't a fascist. I mean, I certainly. I was as serious as Cecil B. Demented when we made the movies, but I had a sense of humor about the whole thing. He had absolutely no sense of humor about what he was doing.
I've got a couple of quotes here. One's Pat Moran from 1974. John the person and John the director are like two different people, but also the same. And then another one from Mick Stoll. He was actually rather a tyrant, a benevolent tyrant, but a tyrant. There was no money for retakes.
There wasn't. I mean, I was a tyrant, and I think that it was the only way that you could get those movies made, in a way, was to, I was serious about it. We got up early. We shot like 20, but we would shoot 20-hour days, and then the film wouldn't turn out. We'd have to shoot the whole thing over on Pink Flamingos in the freezing weather and everything. So it was a group madness in a great way. And Mink has said recently, since, you know, they call us amateurs, but my God, we had to memorize 14 pages of script a day. We weren't amateurs. And I directed them to scream and yell, and I think some of that was from the theater of the ridiculous and all that crazy stuff I read of Artaud and all that, but really I had bad sound equipment before, and I wanted people to hear the dialogue. So now I tell them, pipe down, but then I didn't. It should have been, those films were in Censorround, only they didn't have it. It was so loud that I always wanted to re-release Female Trouble in Censorround. That was the kind they had where the ceiling shook from the sound. They'd turn it, like Earthquake had that, and Roller Coaster had that. It was a short-lived phenomenon like Cinerama or Odorama.
But bearing in mind that, you know, you're working with some of the people there were your friends.
Yeah.
I mean, is that the role you kind of took in your friendship circles, or were you completely different in a sort of friendship setting, if you like?
Well, any kid that makes a movie today makes it with his friends. You know, if he makes it on his cell phone with his friends, you're using your friends. It was like the Hollywood system, though. Like Divine didn't have first billing; Mary Vivian Pierce did, and Divine, the audiences liked him more, so I gave him bigger parts. The same way with Edith. So it was a little bit like a wrecked Hollywood studio, but we were friends. We all hung out together.
But you were talking about billing and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. We talked about billing, and they thought about billing exactly a lot. David Lochary especially, and it was a thing that it was group madness in a way, but they were brave. I mean, Mink and David and Pink Flamingos, they stripped their hair to white and then dyed it with magic marker and blue ink that they had to put on every day that came off on the clothes, the pillows. And they couldn't leave the house. People would beat them up. Now you can go to the drugstore and buy that color. But then they lived almost like that, although they were not the characters. That's the thing. When Pink Flamingos finally became a hit, they met us and they were scared of us because they thought we lived in the trailer and killed people. I mean, and that's because the movies were so badly done. They looked like snuff films. And even when the movie Snuff came out, that fake, the ad was filmed in South America where life is cheap. Can you imagine that, a campaign today? But Roger Ebert, not Roger Ebert, the other one, Gene Siskel, who was a big critic in America, called me up and said, "John, can you take me to the set of a snuff movie?" Like, really seriously. I said, "You're kidding. There's no such thing as a snuff movie." "Yes, there is, and you can help me find it." Oh, God.
I mean, you just touched on then that in this sort of digital age, anybody can be a sort of film. It doesn't have to be a good film necessarily, but you've got the access now just through your phone and other equipment.
Right.
I mean, bearing in mind that you were in an area, Baltimore, which wasn't kind of known for its sort of filmmaking particularly, and I mean, what were the inspirations for you? What was it that influenced you actually to make films?
Certainly Jonas Mekas, who wrote a column in the Village Voice. I wanted to be a beatnik when I was young. That was the first thing I actually wanted to be. And I got the Village Voice. And I read Jonas Mekas had an underground movie column called Movie Journal. And he wrote about all these movies, like Kenneth Anger and the Kuchar brothers. And I would run away on weekends and take the Greyhound bus to New York and go see these movies, and Flaming Creatures. And then you can't imagine what it was like. Sometimes the police would raid Flaming Creatures and the whole audience would be taken away and arrested. Think that's an exciting night at the movies. And they used to arrest the projectionist always. What does he have to do with it? He didn't pick the movie. The poor projectionist they always arrested. But it was exciting to me, so I read about these movies. I got Film Comment, not Film Comment, Film Culture magazine. And so I wanted to be an underground filmmaker. That was the furthest I ever looked. There wasn't midnight movies yet, really. So that was in the future. That was the next step up.
But you talk about, you got sort of a very high art, kind of like Ingmar Bergman stuff, and then.
Well, I saw Ingmar Bergman only because in Baltimore, the Rex, the one movie theater that showed dirty movies, they showed Ingmar Bergman. They just cut out a lot of the dialogue and used the breast scenes in the trailer. So that movie Monica was called Monica's Hot Summer, and Ingmar Bergman was the first one to show nudity, and he was definitely the first one that showed vomit, which was a big influence on me. People vomited in every Ingmar Bergman movie. He was the king of puke, not me.
So you've got your sort of, the international films, and you've touched on the sort of the more art house and experimental films, but there are also the kind of the B movies and the films the nuns warned you against.
Well, we went to the nuns told us, of course, we'd go to hell, and I would memorize the condemned list, and I could name them alphabetically, and cut out ads and pretend I owned dirty movie theaters. And Mom and Dad, that was the worst one that showed the birth of a baby where men were jerking off looking at the actual medical footage of a birth of a baby, That's why I'm up here today. But then we went to see all at the drive-in. I was even arrested at the drive-in for underage drinking, which was really embarrassing. But it's a good memory. But the drive-in would show 3 movies like Herschel Gordon Lewis and Blood Feast and all that. But we'd go in the dead of winter. The drive-in was open for really hardcore people that wanted to see movies. They had to play really extreme movies to get people to go sit in your car when it's 20 degrees out, which you had to have the heater on in the car and everything. So all those influences were put together to me. So I hoped sort of to make exploitation films for art theaters, which is what I ended up doing.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things you've often kind of talked about and you've referred to earlier is the fact that you had really supportive parents.
I mean,
they didn't really get to see many of your films, though.
Well, they were horrified by them. You know, my father paid for Pink Flamingos, and to this day, he never saw it. But I paid him back everything, and when he died, I found in the safe deposit box the little notes that I had sent him with paying 100, which was very touching to me. He summed it all up after he saw Dirty Shame. He said, "It was funny, but I hope I never see it again." So they were proud. They just wished I had gone in another direction. They really loved Hairspray. I mean, that was to them the Broadway musical when it won the Tony. They were so excited about that. So my parents were completely supportive, and I look back on it and realize how incredibly loving they were, because in the beginning, nobody said they were good for 10 years. Fran Lebowitz was the first person that ever gave me a good review, really. And that was 10 years later with Pink Flamingos. So for 10 years, they had to read in the local press, like the meanest reviews. And then we got arrested. And, you know, there was nobody saying I was good. And, but yet my parents knew that I got these made and everything. So what else was I going to do, really? You know?
And they must have known, I mean, as a child that you were, I mean, you talked about playing Car Crash and some of the other influences and so forth. I mean, they must have known that.
Well, they built me a stage. I mean, I had a little stage as a child, like the Divine says in Female Trouble, a little stage. That was me, you know. I didn't shoot up liquid eyeliner, but I wanted to. Yeah.
So, Mondo Trasho was the film that you made that was kind of, it was your first feature-length film, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was feature-length. It should have been a short.
I mean, that's what I was going to say. I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, you've talked about the fact that you wished it had, I mean, is that true? You wished it had been a short?
Yeah, it's way too long, but it was influenced by Warhol and all those movies that came out that were, you know, 7, 12 hours of somebody sleeping. So in the beginning, Mary Vivian Pierce waits for the bus for 15 minutes. But as she pointed out, it was Sunday. The buses didn't run as much.
You had quite a relationship with the Maryland Censorship Board, and there's a woman called Mary Alvo, I think.
Yeah, Mary Avera, yeah.
Mary Avera, okay.
I spit on her grave. No, she...
But couldn't you argue in a way that she kind of helped to make your career?
She did help me, because she would say things like, it was infuriating, you know, when she handed me the scissors on Female Trouble, and she said, "You have to cut that vagina." And I said, "That's a man, that's not a vagina, that's divine." She said, "Don't tell me about sex, I was married to an Italian." And I later used that line in a Dirty Shame. One of the neuters says that, right? So, and but she went the most crazy when she saw Multiple Maniacs, the Rosary Job. She went insane when she saw that, and she went to court and said, "This has to be stopped." My eyes were insulted for 90 minutes, and the judge said, "It is hideous, but it's not illegal." So that's what we were always trying to think of. What's the thing that isn't illegal yet that nobody would do? Because once Deep Throat came out, porn was illegal. That's why in Pink Flamingos we had eating shit scene, because there's no law against that. Then there is now.
And but she was actually quite angry about your career, wasn't she?
Oh, she was furious. I mean, she went crazy. It made her almost, which I delighted in, seeing her. I was hoping to give her a heart attack, right. And she almost had one. But, and I love Governor Hughes. When he finally got named, the first thing he did was get rid of the censor board. But when she died, the papers called me, and I said, "Don't speak ill of the dead." The first time ever, no comment. But she did help my career in a way. She used to go on national television. She would be on the Johnny Carson show and stuff, because she would be so stupid and everybody laughed. She was like the Mrs. Miller of film critics, really. You know, nobody, or Florence Foster Jenkins. I mean, she wasn't in on the joke, but she went along with it.
And over here, I mean, you have a relationship with the BBFC over here as well.
You had the scary kind of censors, smart liberal ones. They're the ones that, after Pink Flamingos, said, "We don't know how to deal with intentional bad taste." And with Pink Flamingos, legally, it took 12. It is finally legal now and doesn't have a distribution company completely. But what they did was each year they would go back to court and they would say, "Well, this was done just to be shock and root." And finally, even the dog shit scene, they said it was done like a horror movie. But it took gradually each one of those to fall. And they were so serious about it. Yeah.
I was going to say, it was a very piecemeal process.
Yeah.
So, well, we'll allow the chicken scene, and now we're going to allow this scene, and then eventually...
Yeah. And it is obscene. I look at parts of it now. The worst thing is that artificial insemination shot. That's the most disgusting.
Well, I'm not sure the shitting scene is the most... I mean, I know it's the one that everybody knows for, but actually I think there are far more shocking scenes in there.
Yeah, there are. The chicken... Although the chicken scene... Well, we ate the chicken. You know, I've always said that. I probably wouldn't film chicken murder today, but... We did eat the chicken, and I got it in a place that said freshly killed chicken, and we put it in the movie, and it got too, so its life was better, if you ask me. I understand why you shouldn't have the filming of a chicken murder but it was supposed to be referring to Mondo Cane and movies like that at the time, which that kind of reference is very lost today.
What we're going to do, we're going to play a clip from Female Trouble. Just a quick clip. It's Dawn Davenport, who it's Christmas morning, and she's so looking forward to opening her new present and expecting cha-cha heels. Let's see whether she gets them or not.
You know, I have no idea where that house is or whose it was. No, somebody found it at the last minute, but if you told me I had to find that house today, I don't know where it is or who lived there. So I'm just thinking of that, thinking, God, how did we get in there? How did that even, I mean, Vincent Perennia, who did all the productions on my movie, put it together and did the tree and all, but I don't know where it is.
And it is great acting by Divine. I mean, the interesting about that role, actually, is it does remind you of Tracy Turnblad a little when you see Divine as Dawn Davenport.
Well,
in the early
I mean,
scenes.
Divine was 28 years old when that was shot, and he's playing a 17-year-old. That's why in Hairspray, nobody knew this, but I wanted Divine, like Legend, I wanted Divine to play the mother and the daughter. And New Line wouldn't let me. You know, I wanted it to be like the Parent Trap.
I mean, in the scene that just follows that one, actually, Divine is assaulted by herself.
Is raped by himself. Yeah.
I mean,
let's go fuck yourself, you know.
But from a technical point of view, actually, that's a really challenging thing to do, isn't it? Especially with the budgets and everything
else.
Well,
the first we did it, we shot it very first before the movie with Divine before he shaved and everything. So he had a beard and male hair. And then Sally Turner, who's also in the beauty parlor scene, who says, like, go throw a goddamn penny and a wishing well. That's her. And we filmed it from one angle with Divine as the man, and you couldn't really see her face. And then they went home, Divine shaved it, the whole thing, got in full drag, everything, and then came back, and we shot it from the other angle with the double in the other costume. And the weirdest thing I remember, we didn't ever ask permission to shoot that. We just were in some park, and some garbage men saw us the first time, and I don't know what they thought. That was a pretty low porno movie, right? If we're shooting on a mattress in this dump, right? And then they were like shaking, and then they were working all day, and then we came back to shoot it again. That's what really startled them, right?
I mean, it was in this film that really kind of set that kind of very unique kind of look that Divine has. And I mean, and that wasn't a usual look at that time. You were looking for the Godzilla of drag queens, you said.
Well, but it was Elizabeth Taylor. Like, Divine was obsessed by Elizabeth Taylor, and I would make him see Bergman movies always on acid. I'm probably the only person that saw Bergman on acid. And Divine always said, no, can't we see Elizabeth Taylor movies? And he loved Elizabeth Taylor. And so it was our version of kind of an overweight, and because Elizabeth Taylor was not overweight then, later in life when I finally did meet Elizabeth Taylor, she looked great, but she did look a little like Divine in a way.
But I mean, this look of like the drag queen look, which was, it wasn't the sort of the petite.
Well, no,
feminine.
I'll tell you who that entire Dawn Davenport was based on. The Diane Arbus picture of the woman with her husband holding the baby that's drooling and that hairdo. That is what inspired Dawn Davenport's look.
In terms of as the films were getting bigger budgets and you had a bit more money to spend, and you sort of took more of a backseat in terms of you weren't having to do everything, you went behind the camera. I mean, was that actually quite difficult to relinquish that control?
No, it was much better when I wasn't behind the camera. I mean, when we first had somebody else shoot it, it freed me up because then I could watch the performance and do the whole thing. But no, I was thrilled to have more technical help every time. I always wanted them to look good. I was never going for a raw look. I thought every one of them was commercial. Every one of them I wanted to sell out. Every one of them I wanted to make money. I was never against having hits. I wanted them to be hits, but I wanted them to realistically be hits in the genre that they were made for, which was either in the beginning underground movies and then midnight movies and then independent movies. And then I went Hollywood, and then I made a Hollywood underground movie, which was a dirty shame, really.
And you've made a few kind of cameo appearances in some of your films, but not all of them.
Really? I think I was
well,
just
like
in Hairspray.
Was it only Hairspray?
Yeah, only Hairspray. And I hated being in my own movie. I got to go to hair and makeup.
But you would go in other, but you act in other people, like you were in the Woody Allen film.
Yeah, I didn't. I don't. That's something I do sometimes just for fame maintenance, you know.
And bearing in mind that you hadn't been to film school and therefore you've been kind of picking it up, when you were on somebody else's set, were you kind of by that stage so established that it didn't really influence you, or was there anything you picked up from other people's sets?
When I'm on other people's set, I just am so afraid I'm going to forget the lines. So basically, no. Woody Allen, he did tell you some things to do. It's not completely true, didn't he? Was great. He was lovely. Every time I was in a movie, I was in The Simpsons. I was in My Name Is Earl. I've done some parts which are just done to be fun. They're always cameos. I don't want a big part in a movie.
In terms of the casting, I mean, that's become such kind of a key thing about the film, not just in terms of the big A-listers later on, like Kathleen Turner and Johnny Depp, but also, in fact, in some of the early films with people like the finds like Edith Massey and so forth. How did that sort of evolve from just being the group of your friends to including other people?
Well, it started really. Edith Massey was discovered by Sue Lowe and Vincent Perenio, who lived in her neighborhood and went to the bar where she worked, and they said, "You got to meet this woman." Pat Moran was the first person that worked with me with casting. She's gone on. She won an Emmy this week, her third one for Veep. She did The Wire. She's done millions of Barry Levinson's movies. She does every film that's ever plays in Baltimore. So it just evolved that we eventually wanted to have so-called quote real movie stars, but at the same time give Mink a big role. I mean, like a big role, like in Serial Mom when Mink and Kathleen are together. I'm all for that, And I didn't stop using people that were in Dreamland. They died. It wasn't like I could use them anymore.
But if they hadn't died, do you think you would have continued?
Yes,
in some
I
shape
think
or form?
Divine probably would have been the grandmother in A Dirty Shame. She would have been Big Ethel. Yes, I think I would still have used them. Yes.
And when it came to somebody like, say, Johnny Depp or some of the kind of those sort of big names, were they very difficult to attract, or how?
No. Well, after Divine died, everybody said, "Well, what are you going to do?" I knew it was never going to have a drag queen again, really, because I just couldn't really after Divine. So I went the opposite in a way, like Johnny Depp. But Johnny Depp came to us because he was Justin Bieber at that time in his life. He was a teen idol. I remember going out. He couldn't leave his house. Like teenage girls, packs of them would be running backwards, crying and falling down. And he hated that. And I said, well, stick with us.
I mean, we talked about sort of the discipline about making movies and so forth, and the fact that you would write, quite extensive scripts that had to be learned off by heart and so forth. The one time you didn't do that was down Linkletter Story.
And it's the worst one.
Do you think so?
Well, my Dreamland actors were not used to ad-libbing like that. The Warhol people, that's all they did. You know what I mean? They were never given a real script. So basically, I think Diane Linkletter's fine for what it was, which was just to test the camera that day, really. But in real life, I have found out that Diane Linkletter was the daughter of a very right-wing television host who in 1969 or somewhere supposedly jumped out of the window on LSD and killed herself, and we made the movie about it and had it out before the funeral, which was kind of crass. But it has later been revealed that she had not taken acid for a year, and both Art Linkletter and Nixon used the case to blame Timothy Leary on the drug culture. They conspired to do that. That was on the Watergate tapes later. So I'm not sorry we did it. And that instant genre led to then Trisha's Wedding, the Coquettes made, which was a bearded transvestite group in San Francisco. And the day Trisha Nixon got married, the movie premiered with all drag queens playing her wedding at the exact time that she really did get married, which was kind of good too. And that ended the genre.
I mean, you didn't make it easy for the people you work with. I think when you in Multiple Maniacs, for example, you've got the massive lobster, for example, and stuff like that. I mean, where do these things come from? And did you really?
Rex Reed said that. Where do these people come from? Where do they go when the sun goes down? Lobsters, Salvador Dali, Jack Smith. Lobsters, I lived in Provincetown every summer where there was a postcard of a lobster over the beach, like, could you eat lobster? But it looked like a giant, scary lobster. So, and I took a lot of LSD.
But the expectation that with almost no budget, somebody would actually recreate that.
The lobster was the first thing Vincent Perenio, my production designer, who's gone on to do all my movies, did. And you can see it's him and his brother in that papier-mâché thing. You can see their legs sticking out. And it was just Divine being raped by a lobster. I don't know where it came from. Pot.
Do you worry about kind of not you worry necessarily, but Pink Flamingos is obviously one of the films that people do constantly fixate about, and they're always going about the dog scene. I mean, does that kind of annoy you a little bit?
No, it doesn't annoy me. You know, Pink Flamingos is not the best film I made, but it'll certainly be in the first paragraph of my obituary. And Female Trouble, the most quoted one, was actually a flop after Pink Flamingos. It did not do well. It was not a midnight hit, and it didn't do that well. When I think it's a better movie. It's one today that is probably more liked. Crybaby was not a success. None of them were successes, really. Well, even Hairspray was not that big of a hit independently, because Divine died a week after it came out, which put a damper on it. You know, who wants to go see a comedy when they would cut on every news show of me laughing with Divine doing press and then cut to me carrying the coffin? You know, it was shocking that happened. So I'm still shocked Divine is dead.
When it comes to the dog scene, I've heard you just very
Divine was more sick of it than I was. Divine got weary of it because people were so frightened of him for doing that. And he got tired of talking about it.
But I've heard you sort of say, "Oh, he was a trooper. He just did it." But really, I mean, was it?
He was just a trooper. I saved it was the last thing. We knew we were going to do it. The problem was the dog wouldn't go, so we had to give it an enema with a hair applicator bottle. You know, all that story. You know the story. I don't have one fresh anecdote. One unexploited second of that dog.
I've heard these tapes afterwards where they're ringing about White Worm.
No, well, they all went home and smoked pot. I didn't go with them, but they started getting up. They said, "I'm going to die. Is that poison?" They said, "Call the hospital and ask." So he pretended that he was a mother who probably said the word retarded even at that time, that he had a child who had just eaten a dog turd, and what should they do? And the woman said, "Well, he might get the white worm." And he went, "The white worm," and everybody howled on marijuana. Right? But he didn't.
He didn't.
He did not get the white worm, no. Whatever the white worm is. And I think at Carsick, I did have a scene where I always was paranoid about tapeworms. Didn't know what they were, but somebody said if you hold up a glass of milk, suddenly it'll come and you grab it. Maybe that was the white worm.
Maybe it was. So in Desperate Living, Divine wasn't available.
No, he was doing Women Behind Bars and he had a hit show. So he was going to play Mole. He was going to play, I thought Divine playing a very butch lesbian would be a good switch. So Sue Lowe played the part, yeah.
So what we're going to do now, we're just going to play a clip from Desperate Living. It's very, very near the start. I think it's shot at your parents' house, but we'll come back to that.
It's my mother's bedroom, yeah.
Your mother's bedroom, and this is
and my father's, yeah.
This is Mink. This is Mink Stoll playing Peggy Gravel, a neurotic housewife. And I think it's interesting in terms of the fact that obviously Divine wasn't available, so it allowed some of the other actors and some new actors to come in and kind of act up a bit.
Yeah.
So let's watch the clip from Desperate Living.
You know, whenever the Supreme Court does something in America today, when people don't like it, that always comes up online, that loop of her going, "I hate the Supreme Court, I hate the Supreme Court."
So that was filmed at your parents' house, and it really was their window that you...
Yeah, it was an antique window. My parents were just huddled downstairs in terror, but they said yes, and it was fine, yeah. It was weird to see my parents' bedroom. I haven't seen that in a long time.
I mean, how did they explain what was going on to your neighbors?
Well, the neighbors weren't nosing around. You know, I mean, we lived the neighbors were a little far away. They didn't explain to the neighbors. I think they just said, "Oh, that's my son." But we used to call that the Dreamland lot, the front yard. I filmed Multiple Maniacs. They have this cavalcade of perversion on their front lawn. That was worse. And then my mother met Divine in a one-piece white bathing suit covered in fake blood. And she served us tea, really. And then Divine was so uptight, he took his wig off, which he shouldn't have. Because then he had a male head and a woman's bathing suit and fake blood all over him. "Hello, nice to meet you," you know. She tried to be understanding, yeah.
And you brought in Liz Renee as well.
Liz Renee was the first sort of outside star. She was a gangster moll. She wrote a book called My Face for the World to See. She was Mickey Cohen's girlfriend. And she got arrested for running nude down Hollywood Boulevard to promote her show. She was great. Liz was great. I love Liz. I was friendly with her right up to when she died, and she was wonderful. She wrote, my favorite thing, she wrote a book called How to Attract Men, and in it she says, "Be nude and have a bar next to your bed."
Once you start involving people like Liz Renee or Gene Hill or Tab Hunter, obviously, I mean, does that then mean everybody has to up their game and change?
Well, you know, all the people that I work with were thrilled that they got to work with stars, because I think everybody rose to that bait. They loved it. They thought it made the movies better. They thought that they made everybody look better. So nobody was upset that I was hiring Hollywood movie stars. No.
And Edith is fantastic in Desperate Living. I mean, the outfit, I'll never forget your lines like Caesar and which is quite an image that great. And then this will treat you to arouse royalty. Yeah. And in that amazing outfit that she wears as well. I mean, it is a fantastic role.
My favorite line is, I'd like to stick my head in your mouth and have you suck out my eyeballs. That's a pretty line. Edith liked being in Desperate Living because she hated her leather costume in Female Trouble so much. She got to be the queen, and so she wore royal outfits and everything. So Edith loved that role. Even though she was a mean fascist role, but Edith was the sweetest lady. So to hear her say those mean lines was so unlike what she was really like. I like it when she's riding around town going, "Hi, stupid. Hi, ugly."
I mean, one thing that definitely comes across is you're very press savvy. You're very kind of hooked in with sort of marketing, and when it comes to kind of potential investors, you're very good at pitching.
Well, I guess I am, because I got Hollywood development deals on every movie from Hairspray up until A Dirty Shame, and including another one that never got made. So, yeah, I think doing the stand-up thing really helps you be able to pitch a project. I like the press. I think you're so lucky here. I'm so amazed. I read 6 newspapers every day. They're so long. Amazing that it's such a great newspaper town still. In America, most cities outside of New York barely have one paper anymore. So I've always liked the press. I read the press. I've written for the press. I didn't hate the press ever. I got along with them, and I realized the press is free marketing. I didn't have money for ads in the beginning. The only way I could promote the movies was to create kind of something that the press wrote about. So it's show business. You have to be able to sell it. I tell every kid that comes to me and say, "What do I do?" Well, once you've got the movie, then you got to have somebody to come see it too. And they say, "I don't care if people see my movies." Well, then you won't work long, because other people that give you the money very much care. And the more money they give you, the more you got to listen. That's just the equation. So I got through all the Hollywood period very well. I mean, I went through Hollywood hell. I went through test screenings. I went through all that. But I expected that. When they give you a big salary to do it, they're going to say something. So I don't have anything bad to feel about my Hollywood years at all.
But I'm interested by, you talk about test screenings, for example. That's one thing I think is really interesting about what you do and what kind of results you would receive. But also, in terms of when you were making Pink Flamingos, you were writing the script on the
We didn't have test screenings.
But Polyester, you had to kind of write and send it in. And it's a different way of making the film, isn't it?
I don't remember if Desperate Living was written before the whole thing written before we were. I think it was. I don't remember, though, because Pink Flamingos, we would shoot just one weekend when we get the money, and then 3 weeks later and stuff.
Well, would they give you notes as studios?
No, they didn't give me notes. There was no notes. The first Polyester was the first movie that a studio actually paid for. The other ones, I raised the money, limited partnership from friends and pot dealers, and then would make a deal with the distributors to distribute it. They never owned the movie. They still don't. But still, like from Polyester on, yes, they were financed by the studio. And Bob Shea is really one of the main reasons of my career always. He was the head of New Line. I went to New Line very, very early when they had they had movies like art movies, but then they had this, karate movies at the same time and underground movies. And he distributed Pink Flamingos. He made that trailer when people are just talking about the movie. So Bob Shea, up to he greenlit A Dirty Shame. I worked off and on with him the whole life. And he's really, I thank him to this day of being very, very, very supportive in my career.
And did you play a role when they were doing these test screenings? Were you around on the day?
Oh, and the real test screenings, the only ones I had test screenings for would be Hairspray, which tested badly. And they said nobody will see a movie with a fat girl. And then it said that men hated it the most, and then the exit poll said they liked it the best. So, it doesn't matter. The worst experience I had with testing was with Serial Mom, when they hated the movie. And although I made the exact script they said, we're never having him where she sets him on fire. We're not going to have it. I said, well, it was in the script. So we had a test screening at the Directors Guild, and the audience loved it. It went crazy. So that doesn't count. They're people that like you. We're going to go to a neighborhood where nobody knows you, and if they like your films, they can't come. And I said, well, why? Just spend them. You can find that. Yeah, but they spent all this money to have a test screening, and then Kathleen Turner went in the press with Liz Smith and said they're trying to change it. And Liz Smith, the gossip columnist, wrote a great thing about Save Serial Mom, and we got to put out the movie we wanted.
I probably won't get you to talk too much about Serial Mum because quite a lot of people are going to go and see it anyway very shortly. But from my point of view, I think it's definitely the most consistent.
I think it's my best movie, actually, if I had to pick one. It was the only one we actually had enough money to make. We had $13 million. Kathleen is fantastic in it, I think. And I had learned a lot by then. I think we had learned really a lot. I think Mink is great in it. I think, and as you said, there's a line in it that I think will get a laugh. I'm not going to tell you that I forgot was in it. That what happened today in the news is, you'll see.
There's a great line in the video store.
Yeah, has really changed. Taking that line means something very different today.
And obviously, you touched on the fact that Divine had died a week after Hairspray was released.
Yeah.
Had you already started planning Crybaby at that stage? Was Divine a part of it at that point?
No,
Or was that later?
I had not started planning it yet. I think after Hairspray came out, it was the only time every studio wanted to make a movie with me. They were sending me presents. 3 big studios wanted to make Crybaby. It was amazing, especially when I got Johnny Depp to do it. So it was the only time ever in my career where all the studios wanted to work with me. And Crybaby was not a success, and then we did the Broadway musical of it, which is coming back, I think. Tonight, they're doing a presentation in New York of the original cast and doing the cast album. We're trying to get it to come back. We had 4 Tony nominations, everything, but it bombed because it got a bad New York Times review. So anyway, I think that Crybaby came after that, and I always thought, well, how I have to do something really different here. Even though Crybaby was just going back 10 years before Hairspray, it was my other part of my youth. I remember, like the beginning of rock and roll before Elvis, but today I think more people have seen Crybaby than any movie I ever made because of television and Johnny Depp.
It's definitely one of the most popular that we're screening this season in terms of sales. Crybaby has been huge. Thinking about the fact that you have these 2 very, very separate, well, you've got a number of different careers, but you've got your art career and your film career, and the 2 of them you don't really mix.
No, I keep them very, very separate, because in the art world, the only obscenity left is celebrity. And so I know that, and I make fun of that with my art career, but it is the same time you have to keep them very, very, very separate. The art world does not like you coming in from another career.
But you did kind of bring them together in Pecker.
In Pecker, I did, but I love the art world. Basically, I'm the opposite. I love the elitism of the art world. I always said art for the people is a terrible idea, really. And but Pecker was unlike me in a way. Pecker was naive. I was never naive. I wanted New York to come see my films when I was 15 years old. But Pecker the idea came from when I would see the pictures of Diane Arbus and see the little kid with the hand grenade and wonder, how does he feel today when he sees his portrait go for $13 million or something? Or how does Nan Golden, who is my friend, how do those friends feel? Like, I collect contemporary art, but I sure as hell don't want to be in it. So how that would happen, which did happen to me too. When you make a movie, as soon as Pink Flamingos became a hit, people think you're rich. They think suddenly, believe me, you don't get rich from a midnight movie. You become a hundredaire.
And Pecker had this very kind of sweet sensibility.
Yeah, it's my nicest movie. The Japan Times said it was a Disney film for perverts.
But you were definitely on kind of bad boy form when you came back with Cecile B. Demented, which had a lot of aggression and...
I guess. To me, they're all the same. I never think that I was trying to do one thing. I just have to think up of a new idea every time. And I always used, the left-wing politics. I love the yippies and all the kind of... comic terrorism. I think it could be effective today. You humiliate your enemy by comic terrorism, by embarrassing them, by doing ridiculous stunts and hoaxes against them. And so I think gave me the idea, everything I remember from my yippie years of everything, to Abby Hoffman and all that stuff, to imagine a film director that would be much more insane than I was if he came out today to make true underground movies. I mean, some of the lines I think I like when Little Fidget says, "We're beyond the critics' reach now," which is so ludicrous. They've kidnapped the star and trying to make her be in a movie.
And bearing in mind, it's about people making a kind of a guerrilla film, and it's about that sort of true independent cinema. You had obviously employed like Stephen Dorff and particularly Melanie Griffith, right, 2 real products of the Hollywood system. And I wonder how they reacted to being kind of part of that little family. Oh,
they got along great. Stephen loved being Cecil B. Demented, and Melanie was wonderful to work with. It's hard to play a bad actress and play it well. And she was a great sport. She was up on that drive-in roof for 6 days at the Benji's Drive-In in the freezing cold. Melanie was lovely through it, the whole thing. I've never had a bad experience with a star. When I meet with them, we sort of test each other out. They got to have some sense of humor. I think they figure if it's a flop, they don't get blamed. I do. They get some street cred for taking a chance. I never had any bad experience. Susan Terrell, she drank a lot, so I would try to direct her, and she, I think, didn't realize she was still in a movie. But, and she would, every person you'd meet, she said, "I'm Susu, and I have the pussy of a 10-year-old. We said, "Oh." Susan, please don't say that to my mother.
Because I want to, we're going to kind of open up not too long from now. But what I'm going to do next is we're going to play a clip from Dirty Shame.
All right.
This is when this is the moment when I've got her name, Sylvia Stickles. She's been hit by a car and there's a sort of sexual awakening going on.
And religious.
And we're going to just watch a clip now with Tracy Ullman and Sylvia Stickles.
My mother said, "You have ruined that dance for me forever." And when we were rehearsing that scene, because she had a magnet in her underpants that made the bottle jump up, we were just outside the studio, and the prop master, Brooke Eaton, was like testing it, and she was doing it, and we looked over, and there was a gas station across the street that people were watching. They didn't know we were filming a movie. It was Tracy Ullman or anything. They're like horrified, right?
I mean, but the thing about A Dirty Shame that I just think, certainly from the UK point of view, it's such a shame, is that pretty much it was picked up by a distributor over here. I don't think it had press screenings. It was
I didn't know anything about the release. It just dumped.
It was released in one screen, I think, in London, and just pretty much buried. And also in America, obviously, it got the NC-17 rating, which seems perverse when so many horror films and
no, it's a movie about sex that only people under 17 should be allowed to see. It's so juvenile, really. So, but then I had to do a neuter version, an R-rated version for airplanes, which it was never shown on an airplane, I promise you. But it was a problem.
Well, what were their biggest concerns about?
Well, they watched it and they called me and I said, okay, what do I had a contract that said I had to have an R rating, and I said, okay, what do I have to cut? And they said, we stopped taking notes. And then I appealed it and did a whole speech and everything. Well, first of all, before the movie even came out, the MPAA said we couldn't call it Pecker, the title. So I went and I won the case. I gave a speech saying, well, in England, then you couldn't allow Free Willy. And you couldn't have Shaft. You couldn't. I said, what angry man writes Pecker on his school desk? No pig man says to a woman, suck my pecker. So I said all this and they said, okay, you can call it that. But they did not say okay when, and to watch it with the the Motion Picture Association at once when you're sitting there watching it with them was deadly. It was complete silence. It seemed like it was like 5 hours long. And then they just said, no, you're not going to appeal it. And then luckily, Bob Shea let me release it anyway, even though it was in the contract. It was a nightmare. Yeah.
Your assistant, Susan, appears in the film in a nude role, quite a major nude role in the film.
Yes, and she was in her 50s, and she's very conservative in real life. And she is nude. She answers the door nude to Chris Isaac.
And was that a difficult sell to get Susan to do that?
Susan's a great actress. She was an actress before she worked with me. She's still an actress, and she asked her kids. It's a totally non-sexual role. She didn't have to do anything. I think I paid for a bikini wax, she asked, but she's great in the role. She's really funny in it.
And you've talked about having a real sort of affinity with Johnny Knoxville.
Oh, Johnny's great. I mean, really, the Jackass movies are the closest in spirit to Pink Flamingos of anybody, I think. If Divine hadn't eaten dog shit, Johnny would have. And I thought Bad Grandpa, it was nominated for the Oscar for makeup, and it should have won, because usually old age makeup's so terrible. For the boys is the worst. She's my favorite old age makeup. They look like Ninja Turtles at the end. But I like bad age makeup. I always go to see movies that have it.
There's several films that you've tried to make, or even started to make. I think about, for example, right back at the start, Dorothy the Kansas City Pothead.
Yeah, I only shot one day of that. I didn't even know. I thought you could shoot sync sound with a tape recorder at the same time and somehow I'd make it work. No, that was just one day. That never happened.
And what was the basis of that?
I don't remember. It was like just Dorothy was on marijuana. I don't remember really. It was short-lived.
And then Flamingos Forever, which you've published as a
that came out as a book. That was the sequel to Pink Flamingos, and that would probably never get made today because it would still get an NC-17, and it's a lot of special effects in it, and you'd need movie stars. That will never get made.
And that would have been between Polyester and Hairspray?
I think, yeah.
There's a film called Glamourpuss.
Glamourpuss never happened. That was about a movie star that came to Baltimore and fell in love with the sewage guy on the movie set that had a company called I Owe You a Number 2. I don't know. That idea came from when we were making Crybaby. Teenage girls actually tried to buy the sewage from Johnny Depp's trailer.
Ooh. Yeah.
And I said to him, get a cold, we'll make some money here, you know.
One film which you have been associated, I have no idea whether it's true, is Confederation of Dunces.
Well, the Confederacy of Dunces.
Confederacy, sorry, yeah.
I did want to make it at a time with Divine as Ignatius, and I found out later when I love the book very much. I would never do that today. That's jinxed, I think. That's been tried. That movie.
So many people
have tried to make it. But when I lived in New Orleans with Mary Vivian Pierce and Danny Mills, who played Crackers and Pink Flamingos, right before Pink Flamingos came out, when New Line had had it for a year, I was the poorest I ever was. I didn't have one penny. We lived in this horrible apartment on Rampart Street. But I found out later, in the same block, was John Kennedy, the author, living with his mother, writing that book at the same time. Of course, we didn't know him or meet him, but the exact same block, he was doing that.
But is that the only time you've almost kind of done somebody else's work?
Yeah, and I never did it. I don't want to ever do anybody else. But they didn't write it to me. The fun of it is thinking it up and then making it real. So yeah, I just loved the book so much at that time that I did have meetings about it. It never happened.
And then most recently, Fruitcake.
Fruitcake, but that's a movie I got paid a development deal to write and everything. You know.
And that would have been Johnny Knoxville.
He was the father, but it's mostly a children's Christmas movie, so all the parts were kids mostly. Fruitcake is a little kid. It's about meat thieves in Baltimore, right, on Christmas.
And is that still a possibility, do you think?
It's a possibility, who knows. I'm involved in a TV project that I can't talk about, but maybe it's going to happen, and I'm waiting to hear. So
Okay,
we'll
so
see.
actually after a sort of a 10-year break, it's quite possible
Maybe,
you might
that
come back.
could happen, and if the TV doesn't happen, I'll write my next book, so whichever. Just as long as I have a way to tell a story.
Okay.
Well, you always say things in a book, and it says like if someone vomits in one of my films, it's like a standing ovation. Those kind of lines stick around. Do my films have socially redeeming value? Sure they do, I think. I think Hairspray was about a serious subject, but you can't come out and do that. Even if they have socially stuff, all humor is political, what you're asking people to laugh about, especially if it's something they don't feel so safe about. So I guess I'll admit that they can have that, but they also have to be entertaining to have any relevance to make anybody change how they think about anything, to be political. You cannot preach. You have to make people laugh, and then their defenses are down, and they'll at least listen to your argument. So I guess when I wrote that I prided myself on having no social redeeming value was because at the time you had to prove socially redeeming value with the Supreme Court to have nudity. It was a very important thing. That's why in Andy Warhol's Blue movie they have real sex talking about Vietnam. That's why in the Russ Meyer movie they talked about Vietnam. You always had to talk about something socially redeeming. So I was probably making fun of that criminal defense at the time. Maybe Brad Renfrew. Let me think, who else? Scott Marlowe, who I was so amazed. He was in A Cold Wind in August. He was like a beatnik stud in the 60s that Tab Hunter told me in his book that he had an affair with. And I said, you never told me that, Scott Marlowe, God. So maybe those two. I've really been lucky. Almost everybody that I've ever wanted to get in a movie, I've had meetings and they've said yes. I guess I'd always love to have Meryl Streep in a movie. I'm a big fan of Meryl Streep, and I've met her, but no agents have really pushed for a meeting. Let's put it that way. Would tell them the most important thing to realize is a no is free, that you will get rejected in show business a lot. And so what? Throw another turd on the wall, something sticks. That basically, that basically you're going to keep asking. Show business is rejection, and it's made up of people that are insecure, or why else would they go in a business that depends on me asking you if I'm good? So I think it's something you have to get over rejection, and at the same time learn the business of it. You can be the best artist in the world, but then what? What do you do? Read the trade magazines. Find out. Go to every movie. See the bad ones too. Watch a movie with all the sound turned off. Then you can see how it's made. You can see the shots and everything. See movies, good, bad movies, everything. Go to the movies. Participate in the world you want to get in. You know, I get older and my audiences get younger. That's the only thing you can't buy. That's the ultimate compliment. My films, when they started out, it wasn't a total gay audience. It was just people that were pissed and had a sense of humor. It was minorities that didn't even get along in their own minorities. They were outcasts among themselves. I had bikers, drag queens that everybody hated. You know, it was a whole different group that were political in a way and angry at the same time. So that it became mainstream, I don't think Female Trouble is still that mainstream, but the fact is that it's lasted generation after generation and people still see it and quote the lines to me and everything, is the ultimate compliment because it's lasted, and it's lasted this long. So I'm incredibly grateful that anybody remembers one of my movies. I mean, look at the paper every Friday, how many movies come out every day that even Hollywood, most of them, are forgotten completely in 2 weeks. You don't even remember they came out. So organizations like this that revive people, and also people said to me, I'm one of the few people that have had a revival and a retrospective that are alive. You know, this is like great. It's like being at my funeral and eavesdropping.